Our future is actually not written yet. We get to decide what the story is. I've been working on a story coming up on 17 years now with the northern white rhinos. I started that story when nobody cared about it. I got 100% rejection when I pitched that story originally.
How can we move from hope to activism or change?
I created a nonprofit called Vital Impacts. I wanted to empower more visual storytellers to focus on stories in their backyard.
For us, where does the camera come into it?
And I think the best way to do that is to
Welcome to the Mood Podcast, uncovering the art of conversation through the lens of photography and creativity, one frame at a time. I'm your host, Matt Jacob, and thank you once again for joining me in today's conversation. My guest this week is Ami Vitale, a world-renowned photographer, filmmaker, and storyteller whose work has taken her from documenting war zones to becoming probably one of the most influential voices in conservation photography. Over the course of her career, Ami has shed light on humanity's darkest conflicts and most hopeful triumphs, capturing images that remind us of our interconnectedness with each other and the natural world, as well as filling front pages of magazines. Her storytelling has illuminated the plight of endangered species, the resilience of communities, and the urgent call to reimagine our relationship with nature and with the planet. In my conversation with her, we really explored how Ami's early experiences covering conflict shaped her shift into conservation storytelling and what those lessons reveal about our collective bond with nature. We talked about the power and responsibility of photography, not only as a tool to witness suffering, but as a force for empathy, solutions, and change. You'll hear Ami's reflections on documenting Sudan, the last male northern white rhino, and how moments of despair can also lead to hope and collaboration. We also dive into the future of photography in an AI-driven world, the role of mentorship for emerging storytellers, and the deeply human qualities that make photographs resonate well beyond aesthetics. So here is the wonderful Ami Vitale. Ami Vitale, thank you so much for joining me on the Mood Podcast. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to have you from the other side of the world, it seems. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, I love how connected we all really are these days. It's a
Yeah, I
pleasure.
mean, it's such a privilege to be able to do this. But I'm going to make your life a little bit more difficult and put you on the spot straight away because we just don't have enough time to just go through everything and, ask my million questions that I really want to dive into. So I'm going to just get straight to the point and we'll see where it goes from there. My biggest, I guess, feeling and philosophy, or should I say doubts and concerns, as well as, the optimism that's somewhere inside of me, just feels like in a world where it seems like everything is more broken than ever. I want to hear you, or I want to know what you think in terms of where we can find hope.
What a fantastic way to start this. And I really mean that because if there's one takeaway from this conversation, it is just about this. And that is this idea like if we only pay attention to the headlines, um, there's just the appropriate response is despair. But honestly, when you go into the world and wrap your arms around it, you realize that it's one piece of the story and that actually we are in the middle of the story. And so much of the hope, personally, I see is in the rivers and the trees and the nature and the creatures around us. And if you listen really closely, they're all telling us um, a lot of things. And I think some of them are that just grief and hope live side by side and that our future is actually not written yet. We get to decide what the story is. And I think our hope is that we all choose to not just feel, but to act and to move beyond, I think, like just observation and become, I would say, like, realizing the power within all of us, like the power of, us each as individuals to make concrete changes in our future, in our world. And and I think that there's just so many beautiful stories I see all the time when I choose to look. Um, and that, I've recently been looking at all the trees, outside, and I think it's so funny when you start paying attention to the nature around us and you realize like how we've made ourselves the center of the story. And, you know, in some ways, like humans have turned this narrative around where we're like, oh, they're just the backdrop to our story. When actually, if you're paying attention, you realize like we are the backdrop to their story. They've been around, thousands of years longer than us. Same thing with species. And I love going to nature, honestly, for, this sense of hope. Like, I mean, look at any creature, look at monarch butterflies. Like, I love thinking about, like, the journey. They make this journey around the world, and not one single life will ever be able to see the whole journey, but yet somehow they know, the next generation where to go to pick up that journey and to keep going where they need to go. And there's just something so magical and wondrous about life and this, just everything around us. And it's not that I don't feel despair and that I'm, just ignoring all of the things that we are doing, the impacts that we are having. I mean, I know very well. Um, but I also know that when we give it a chance, like just even a tiny chance, um, how resilient, and I know that that word is really overused, but I have seen how nature and humans can heal and regenerate, and so much of that is just about paying attention and figuring out like how do we heal ourselves in this world around us. And I know that's very long-winded, but yeah, I actually have quite a lot of hope and optimism for this world.
Well, that's was wonderful to hear, and there's so many things that we can take away from just what you said. And I don't want to dwell too much on your background because we have limited time, and people can go and you're very much present in the midst. We can, I've obviously followed you for a long time, and this is a common theme of your narrative and what you talk about and what you try and educate. And what's so inspiring is you live through what you talk about. But when we see statistics and data like 73% of wildlife disappeared in the last 50 years, in the last 50 years blows my mind in both an extremely sad way, but a very shocking way. And it's sometimes I feel like hope can become despair or change into despair quite rapidly. And hope is this artificial thing that we cling on to just to try and make ourselves feel better. How can we move from hope to activism or change, or whether it's us on the other side of the world who aren't kind of at the forefront of this? What can we do with our cameras, with our voices, in order to try and make a difference? And I'm going to bookend that question with I guess a deeper one that I'm not sure we know the answer to. But why do you think so many people don't care about these existential threats, not just to ourselves, but to the planet, to the wildlife, to nature, to everything that you and I and many other people care about? What is it? What is it ingrained? I watch a lot of this stuff. I read a lot of this stuff. We care a lot about the same things that you do. And the biggest question that always sits over the top of me is, well, why does no one else care? Why are we this self-centered species that just care about making the next buck and getting attention from the wrong areas rather than giving attention and paying attention to the more meaningful ones? That is many questions in one statement. Pick anything and run with it.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that humanity is incredibly, we're so intelligent and we have like this ability. We're probably the only species that has the ability to like look in the past and also think about the future, right? And that's really really special. I think, though, in our great, discoveries to make this world more comfortable for ourselves, what we've done is actually created this world where we're so disconnected in a lot of ways, and scared, I think, of discomfort, and and actually, I think many of us who have the privilege of really embracing the discomfort, and that I mean in many ways, like metaphorically and literally, like whether it is, intellectual discomfort or physical discomfort, for some spiritual discomfort, like whatever it is. I think a lot of it is wrapped around like this desire to put ourselves in a cocoon and not have to feel the discomfort. And actually, when we can't escape it, truthfully, it is part of being human. And I think when we walk towards all the things that make us afraid, it reconnects you. When you choose to really feel the despair of what is happening. I started off and mentioned it earlier, but like love and grief are neighbors, they are intricately connected. And I think by trying to prevent ourselves from grieving, it also means that we're not loving in the same way. And that we need to all open up ourselves, and our hearts, and allow ourselves to love, one another, this world, the creatures we don't understand that might make us, feel afraid. And I think we're so afraid of like fear and disconnection. All those things are so intricately connected. And I just think on a pragmatic level, like, it's so easy to get reconnected. It just involves, like, really pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. And I think, like, we all have to work to that. And once you're there, you realize, like, how absolutely magnificent and how little there is to be afraid of. Um in the I'm talking in big sweeping terms here. Like, there's a lot to be afraid of, actually, but at the same time, I just think about, for me, it's like, the natural world, and I also mean that, you don't have to travel far, like, even in the most urban landscapes on the planet, there is so much nature all around us. You don't have to travel to the most remote places on the planet. And in fact, I don't think it's good to do that because, we need to keep some of these places pristine, and we don't need more human impact. Like one of my things lately is like, we don't all need to be going to Antarctica and to like all corners of the planet, and we're impacting nature. So how do we live more? It's a question for all of us. How do we live, with less, a little more in our communities? And I think when you are like really fully involved in your community, you see how much you can do. And all the stories that I tell in my work are really very much based on communities coming together to like reimagine this world which we've woven. And it's really important to remember that we have woven this, like we've done this, and that, human ingenuity is beautiful. But I do think, you know, you've asked these big questions. I don't know the answer to all of them, but I think that over and over again, I see that it's really important not to just give up. Like like just empathy and love and care and being engaged and wrapping your arms around anything you can that, makes you more engaged is like the way forward.
It also helps oneself because we find more fulfillment and meaning in that. So it goes both ways. And you talk about collaboration a lot, and I really resonate with that. We grieve together, we laugh together, we love together, and we suffer together. So even if it's something happening the other side of the world, and I know you've talked about this before, there's something that is part of us that suffers with that. It's important to, like you said, lean into that discomfort and try and find love from that. But where does I was trying to stop the big questions now, but where does for us, where does the camera come into it? Because you talked about, and I totally agree with you. I find this balance difficult to maintain all the time. It's like we want to go and experience these wonderful parts of the world, these wonderful cultures that we know really deep down we know very little about as people in a normal environment. And as a photographer who's interested in these stories and these cultures, we want to be able to go and selfishly potentially capture that, but work with them in a collaborative way and hopefully a responsibly way. Many people that go on these photo tours that don't do things responsibly, but when the deeper stories and the bigger stories come around, which is, I guess, where you fit in, and you're telling these really deep and meaningful stories. How do we how do we balance the responsibility of not ruining a place or not, not really damaging a culture by encouraging more people to go there, but also more importantly, tell that story and make people aware of it?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I started Vital Impacts, this nonprofit that supports, um, environmentally oriented, storytellers is I wanted to empower more, visual storytellers to focus on stories in their backyard because I think it is so important that, unless there's like really a reason and you've been putting in the years and the time, like those kind of stories take years and years and years. And I think that, you know, I I began my work as a photojournalist working for, um, international news agencies, and they would parachute me in to places all over the world. And I, at the time, like, immediately recognized, like, the trouble with that and how much ignorance comes along and how much misrepresentation. And so I started very early on thinking about these questions about like who gets to tell the story and what is the story. And I don't think we actually focus enough on the ethics and the asking ourselves these questions and like the why are you telling this story. And I actually think that, it's really important to find a story and just commit to it for a very long time, and I think the best way to do that is to do something that is close to you for so many reasons. It's better for the planet, your connections are deeper, um, and then yet, yeah, I'm a hypocrite totally because like some of the stories that I have spent the longest on, I've been working on a story coming up on 17 years now with the northern white rhinos. And like the way that happened was that I started that story when nobody cared about it. And I was like pitching it to everybody, and the editor's eyes glazed over. I got 100% rejection when I pitched that story originally when they were moving. At the time, there were only 8 of them known to be alive, and I just thought to myself, like, why is nobody getting it? Like, this seems really important to me. I'm gonna witness possibly the extinction of this magnificent creature." And so, I think it was, like, some of the stories that are far away from me physically, it was, like, really they began a long time ago when nobody else was interested in them. And so for me, that's always been like I have a checklist of like when I'm going to start a story. And it's like, is this a story that has an important message for all of us? Is there like, can it be a blueprint for other places? Is there a sense of urgency to telling it now? Why am I the person to tell it? And, just like a whole bunch of questions that I ask myself. And I think that all of us need to do that. And I also think it doesn't mean that just because you're not from a community or a place, you shouldn't tell a story, because honestly, sometimes it takes people from another community to tell some of the stories. Like, there's secrets in, there's things that not everybody can tell. And sometimes, like, an outside set of eyes can be really useful, but you need to commit to it over time and let the story evolve and do justice to it and not be exploitative, because we know how easy it is to exploit. Um, so I think about all of these questions. I actually think a nice way to work is like having collaborations where, if you're not from a community, you're really working in collaboration with the communities, um, and perhaps like, helping support some of their storytellers, and, giving, it's got to be generous both ways, and trust, and like the relationships and trust have to be there. But I mean, I love that you're asking that question. And I think it's something we all need to think about more and more. I mean, I really like my main dream and focus is like focusing on things right here, because all the issues are literally the same across the planet in terms of, you know, when it comes to environmental issues. Like, I promise, most stories are, it's the same thing being played out everywhere. We are causing such, damage to this world, and like you can find a story in your backyard. And the last thing I would say about that is, one thing I've noticed is a lot of photographers will see what's already been done and like try to go in and tell a story again. And I'm like, why aren't you guys finding a new story? Because there are millions of stories of communities who actually need a visual storyteller. It is the currency of today. And, powerful photo stories can actually move the pendulum and create great change. I mean, that's why I believe in it so much. I really have seen what good, powerful storytelling can do to, create positive change and support for communities. Um, and I always wonder, like, why are the photographers going and doing the same exact story? And very often repeating an old story that has evolved. That has happened to me so many times where I can tell when somebody's like gone into, a community, um, and you're like, the community very well. You're like, that's an old story. Why aren't they, you can tell what's going on. Does that make sense?
It does. All of that makes sense, and I have so many questions that are going to stem from that. But I resonate deeply because I'm trying to do a story of my own that no one else, I don't think, is doing at the moment. But time is against me because it's to do with, I'm not going to tell you where it is, but it's to do with the impact of tourism on a rural landscape, essentially, and how modernization is can be a good or bad thing depending on which side of the fence you sit on. And there's a lot of collaboration and like a really, really personal story for me, but it's a rush against time because we're all expanding, we're all modernizing. There's very few parts of the world and that have kind of still the rawness that one would want for such a topic. So I feel like we're kind of running out of time in some respect with stories like that, and it's often easier for people to just go and copy a story because now a lot of people live for attention and likes and follows, and maybe that's the new currency or the currency of today in terms of the attention economy and how photographers can get a leg up in the industry. I don't know. I'm surmising a little bit there, but I can understand that mitigation of risk to go and try something new and try and tell something that hasn't been told. But I want to ask you, going back to the pictures of your story of the northern white rhinos back 17 years ago, why do you think, or if you know, why did you get rejected all the time? What was it about that pitch that didn't interest?
Great question. I actually wrote out all the rejections, all the editors that rejected, and I wrote them back and asked them, like, "If you have time, could you tell me why?" Not everybody responded, but a few did, and it was fascinating because they all basically responded in the same way, and it taught me so much about, like, what you need to include in your pitches or grants or whatever, it is you're working on, and I think a few things, like, one, as photographers, sometimes you need to really actually always we assume people might understand what we're going to show. And then I realized, like, they don't even understand, like, what images I'm gonna make. So you need to explain visuals. And if you can, even go and do a little reconnaissance and make some images to be able to share what the possibilities are, and then lay out what your visual plan is, because so many stories are really great stories, but that they all said the same thing. It could be a great story for radio, but we don't think it's a photo story. And I was like, good, good to hear. But then I realized, like, yeah, I need to tell them and really draw out a visual plan and map for them. And that's the truth. Like, so many editors are, in an office in a big urban place. They have no clue what you're going to show. They thought that I would never see the rhinos, that they would be in these crates, that they would be on an airplane, that we would never really see them. And I was like, oh, well, let me show you. And then the second piece was, why now? Like, is there a sense of urgency? And I think I didn't express that this was urgent for this moment, that, like, this was, also being able to show that you're gonna, not just cover an event, but, like, there's a sense of urgency to the whole story, and it's not just this one event, but, like, this thing is unfolding and I am the one to be telling the story right now. And then you have to express how you have your access. Like, I was an absolute nobody. Nobody knew me. Nobody cared about me. And it was like, well, do you have access? And I did, because I had lived in the Czech Republic and for 4 years before, and created all these relationships. So, kind of urgency, access, why are you the person to tell that story? How is it visual? And, yeah, and I think those are a few of the points that I now, like, in all of I like to force myself to apply for grants every single year, because it actually, I realize, when you write a grant, it helps you actually understand your story better. Because sometimes, like, we go in and we have this, like, very vague idea, and, like, they really drill down and ask you tough questions that we all need to be answering for ourselves and to the communities we're working in too. So, yeah, I love that question. And I would say, for anybody applying for grants or sending pitches, never be afraid to ask why when you're rejected. Sometimes they won't be able to respond, but it's a really great way to learn and make your story better.
It was really good to hear how you iterated that process through asking yourself questions and then trying to figure out a way you can expose what you're thinking or visualizing with some images, so that even more so today, I imagine that people just want to see a one page of image and then they kind of have a feeling about it already. Tell us a little bit more about the grant process for someone who's a little bit ignorant like myself in terms of that world. Obviously, like, we're all familiar with pitches, but how are grants different, and what's the application process? Who gives grants? What is that whole world like?
I'm so glad you asked this. I don't know when you're airing this, but I hope soon, because I created a nonprofit called Vital Impacts, and we give out $50,000 in grants every year, plus 10 more spots where we really partner up each mentee with the people that are, like, the best in the business, that can truly open up doors and change your life and create opportunities for you. Like, that is my goal. I don't want to just like have this like mentoring program on paper. I really want to uplift new voices and get work into the world that is important. And it's through exhibitions and publishing. And we have so many, like, it's just this great opportunity. And I'm shocked because we're 2.5 weeks away from the deadline. And I can't even tell you how few people have applied. And I'm like, "What?" When I am applying, I mean, there's so many grants actually out there. This is funding to allow you to not have to report to an editor in the same way. Like, we partner you up with a very good editor, but you don't have their agenda to fulfill. You can actually work on something with total freedom and intellectual freedom and the ability to like pursue a story with like the ultimate, freedom. I mean, isn't that what we all want? To be an artist, to explore like all the richness inside of you? And I just am completely surprised why there are not more people applying. And I
How do we apply it? To tell us more about that.
just go to our website, vitalimpacts.org, and actually we host it. We keep it on, the grant goes through a website called Pictor, Picter. And if you don't, apply on Pictor because Pictor sends you like newsletters every week that give you not just Vital Impacts grants, but like every grant that is being hosted on Pictor. So it has never been easier. Like, honestly, my whole career was launched because I did apply for grants early on. And the amazing thing is, even if you don't get the grant, this happened to me multiple times, an editor, like, there's all these judges judging the grants, and the judges would write me later saying, "You didn't get the grant, but I really liked your story, and maybe we can publish it in this magazine." And that happened to me multiple times where I just created amazing connections because you never know. And it's not even just about winning. It's like there's so many reasons why to apply. It makes you a better writer, it makes you a better storyteller, you learn what you're gonna like, it just helps you focus a little more on what it is you're trying to create, and it gives you, this introduces you to this whole world of editors you don't even know yet or who don't know you. So there's just like there's not you gain something even just by applying. Um, but yeah, I would encourage everybody who doesn't think they have, the skill, like I think a lot of us are really self-critical. I mean, I know I am, and I've also learned not to not be so proud, to like just try, just try for things and you just never know.
It's that discomfort thing, isn't it? It's a lot of imposter syndrome, discomfort. Oh, I'll never get it, so there's no point doing it. But actually, you hit a really good point there. You practice articulating your pitch or your application and your story, which everyone's up in their own head, right? Until we actually write things down and plan things out, or jump on a call, or actually vocalize things. Only then do we really, a few things click. Oh, yeah, I can explain it that way, or that means more to me, and I'll take that direction. So there's that, but also, just as importantly, you're gonna make connections. You're going to even get your website in front of people or your portfolio in front of people, and you don't know who's seeing it, right? And in this day and age where people are just have social media accounts coming out of their backsides, and just so many distractions. There's so much stuff, especially in the photography world, where it seems to be quite saturated in that respect. It isn't, but the way we perceive other photographers is, it's almost invaluable. And if these applications are free, then there's no reason not to do it, right?
Yeah, some of them, uh have a fee. We have, fee waivers, so you just have to write us if you genuinely cannot afford it. But, there's great expense to going through applications because we pay all of our judges and for their time. So we have a small, it's $25. And I think, but there's plenty of free things. And if you genuinely can't afford something, just write people and ask them and say, I can't afford it. And, again, like there's always ways. And the other last thing I would say about it is the other beautiful piece of it is we're all trying to find our voices, like, and we're all evolving, hopefully, all the time. So I find these exercises really healthy in allowing, every time I write a new grant, like it helps me find my voice and why am I doing this? And like really have this kind of honest conversation with myself. And I think sometimes, in this world of social media, there's so much posturing and people like trying to, do things for what they think other people want, their perception of what others want. And I hope that, certainly with vital impacts, I hope that people get past that and realize like this is an opportunity to like dig deep into yourself. Like, why what are you truly passionate about? Why do you care about this? Why do you want others to care about it? And I just think like these are the conversations I want to start creating, and like a real honesty and vulnerability because we need that right now. Like there's just so much artificialness and like, and I feel it. And the other last thing I will say, speaking of artificialness, I know it's easy to use like AI to write grants, but I feel it the second I read them. I would much rather see a grant that is not perfect. I love the imperfections. I love hearing authenticity in voice. And I can actually feel when somebody is like sent over this like grammatically and perfectly written, but absolutely soulless essay. I want to see your soul. I want to see who you are. I want the imperfections.
My concern is that AI will get so good, super intelligent AI will get so good in the next few years that it will be able to replicate that soul even better than we can articulate it, right? But that's just, I guess, my
That's
pessimism.
another conversation for another time because currently I'm not feeling it. I'm feeling, I get a lot of essays that were definitely generated in AI. And I guess that is my advice to people, like, try to first dig deep and figure out, like, what is it you're trying to say?
Yeah, and when you're talking about that artificialness, the level of artificiality, or in certainly in social media, I think that's going to be essentially replaced by AI anyway. So I think those, if it now is the time to really ask yourself those questions, especially as a photographer or storyteller or some, everyone that's trying to find meaning in a craft and trying to find a way to find their voice, which is not an easy thing to do. This is the time to really go deep and to figure out what means the most to you and ask yourself those questions and how you can make potentially a difference, or something a little bit more deep and meaningful than what is essentially going to be replaced by AI, in that kind of superficial sense anyway. So I think, now's a better time than ever because those stories are going to be we're going to be crying out for that. You're already seeing it with grant applications, crying out for the authenticity and the real person behind these sentiments and these meaningful stories that people want to tell. So I don't know whether you agree with me with that. I mean, we can talk a little bit about AI, but I think in terms of photography, we can be concerned about it on one aspect because, synthetic image generation, artificial image generation is going to replace a certain aspect of photography. But in my opinion, like these real human connections, collaborations, stories are going to be more value than ever. Would you agree with that?
100%. And I mean, I guess that's like the point is like just get out there and do the work and your work will show. Like, there's no replacement for just good, hard energy, being spent on your craft, right? And I think, storytelling is the oldest thing, like, way before people were even, you know, making art on cave walls. They were out telling good stories. Like, it's the thing that makes us human. It differentiates us from, other species, I believe, is like um, that again, like looking back in the past, thinking about the future. That's what makes us human. I don't think that's ever going away. We love story. It shapes us.
So tell me, rewind a little bit, because I'm interested in your pivot from photojournalism to essentially environmental or nature, wildlife photography, whatever we want to put a label on it. What was the seminal moment for you there? 'Cause your background in photojournalism, why the pivot?
Well, I mean, I was really in the beginning very interested just in humanity and wanting to understand the world. And I think early on was always very curious. I wanted to get out from, the community I grew up in and wanted to know what else was out in the world. And that really led me to be very much a nomad for a lot of my life, just um, in a constant state of motion, living in many, many different places and very much drawn to the craft of visual storytelling pretty early on. And and it led me down this path right away where I began kind of covering the horrors of the world, the wars, conflicts. And I did that for about a decade and really like in the beginning was being sent to places like Gaza and Afghanistan and then realizing pretty quickly that I wanted to go deep and learn language, learn culture, learn like if I'm going to be telling stories, I wanted to live in those places and live the stories. So I ended up living in Kashmir for 4 years and really tried to go find the stories that I thought were not being covered by media. Like one of the first stories I did on my own was in Angola. And I remember trying to pitch it to editors, and their eyes glazed over. And they were like, Amy, nobody cares about Angola. I was like, how do you know? You haven't even seen the story. How do you know? And I self funded, like, in the beginning, nobody would actually hire me as a photographer, so I had to work as an editor, which was a blessing in disguise because I learned the business. Like, I learned how the whole news industry works. And I worked for Associated Press in Washington, D.C. and New York, like at the hub of these places. And my job, like, it was super interesting. To kind of see how news was being reported and what the hopes were. And I felt like I had this chance to, you know, go and do storytelling and journalism and kind of fill the holes that I was seeing. And when I say that, I mean, I really felt like we were really good at responding to crises, like reporting on it. But I noticed pretty early on that like, we would do, like, a news press event of a story that really deserved long-term storytelling. And so rather than, like, photographing a talking head, I was like, "Why don't I just dig down deep into one of these news and spend years working on it and showing the nuance?" And so that was kind of early on, and then kind of going and investing in these stories. myself in the beginning because nobody would hire me, like early on to do the long-term storytelling. So I started like taking my savings and going to places and then pitching the story after. Um, and then that's when I learned all about grants. So I started applying for grants, and that was kind of my pathway. So then after about a decade of this, I began to realize like, wow, almost every single one of the stories at the backdrop was the natural world, but we weren't focusing on that, and actually the erosion of the natural world leads to more human suffering. When there is a breakdown in our environment and there's like lack of clean water or lack of resources, like it leads to more conflict. And so I just kind of did this 180 and realized like I want to start including nature and our environment into the actual stories. And and that has just led me down this really beautiful path where I would like ask a question and then start researching and realize that there were major holes in almost every single story. Like even the poaching story, rhino poaching is like all I was seeing when I started that story was kind of, you know, um, outsiders talking about the poaching crisis. And I began to ask, like, what do the communities living with the rhinos think? Do they care? Do they love them? What do these creatures mean to them? Who are the poachers? How is this happening? And bottom line, what is the solution? Like, is there a solution? And I just kept going down these rabbit holes and realizing like the people living with the wildlife are the best protectors. And why aren't we telling their stories? And I kept going down and down and down and finding amazing stories that really were not being told. And, now there's a much everybody's telling stories and including, the communities, which is fantastic. But they were largely being left out of the stories when I began. And I was like, why is this happening? We still do that in a lot of cases. And I think it's so important to engage with the communities you're working with and, asking them. And then I think now more and more about like the ancient guardians, it's not just humans, it's, trees and wildlife. And, they play this indispensable role, from big mega fauna to the tiniest of creatures, and we all inhabit this earth. And I think like now I'm more curious about shining a light on the, the less charismatic creatures who don't get that attention. So there's like, that's what I mean is like, instead of going for the stories that have already been told and told very well, try and find the stories that actually could use really great storytellers.
I've always wondered why we treat an ant differently to a cow or a dog, right? There's this hierarchy of animals that we, as a sentient being, we treat so differently. It's always fascinated me. That's definitely for another time. But it's such a wonderful principle to such a wonderful principle to think about us as part of the landscape, not as ruling it, right? And if only we all had that mentality, I think the world would obviously be a better place. But do you think this is just an education issue, or is it a greed issue? Is it an ignorance issue? Because we are going down the path right now, mainly due to climate change, of there being a lack of food and a lack of water, certainly in the West, as much as we're destroying the lands, as well as we're getting bigger floods and larger droughts. And this is only going one way.
I love that. We now, I think as journalists tend to focus on the despair again. And not that we shouldn't, like, we need to talk about that. But then I think about the reverse of that. Like, think about the magic and the wonder and like, how can we tell those stories of like these other beings who make the air we breathe and they shape the water we drink and they eat trees eat sunlight and turn it into food and like how incredible is that? without all of these things, we're nothing. But instead of, I think we need to like really think about and be clever storytellers and like maybe shift that narrative and talk about get people out into the world again. Like it's magic. It's so magical. And I just, I think that there's like, I think about it a lot. Like, how do we, as storytellers, make people care, make them want to engage? And I think a lot of it is in just that, like not only focusing on the fact that we are going, I mean, yes, we're going through the sixth great extinction, purely human driven. Like I think that is all beaten into all of our consciousness, and I think it actually makes people recoil and like just want to tune it out. And I want to make people tune in. And how to make people tune in. It's like making it fun again in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're innately drawn to shock, horror, drama, right? This is the clickbait society, and it's just what gets people eyes on whatever we want to get their eyes on. So there is this element of, how do we want to garner people's attention on the right things and the positive things and the incredible difference so many wonderful people and establishments and nature are making around the world. But it's not that it's boring. It's just people for some reason don't want to see those stories, or they do, but it gets drowned out by the more interesting and more shocking stories, which is war, conflict, and all of that
And how
politics.
horrible and how afraid. I mean, honestly, think about think about the power structures. It actually benefits them to keep us all really afraid, you know, really afraid. I mean, I think this is fascinating. I heard a speaker recently talking about AI, where they're like, they want us to focus on, this idea that AI could, take over the world, and what would happen? When actually, the real danger of AI is not that. The real danger is all the energy it consumes and the water, and like I just think about, taking a few steps back and realizing, like, we as the journalists and the, photographers and the stories we choose to share, are they pushing people more into that, like, place of not wanting to engage, really deeply afraid of one another? The world is this terrible place. Humans are horrible. Um, we're this just rapacious, evil species, or, and then like kind of it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way when you do that, and then, allows these people to invest in going to Mars when actually we've been given, we are on the most beautiful little patch of real estate. And, why I think about that a lot, like, these narratives that we kind of regurgitate and tell over and over again, instead of, like, uh, thinking about, like, how do you turn a story on its head and reignite, like, real passion around, getting engaged, because we are all like, we're such an amazing, humans are amazing. And I think that's it. I think it's not enough to only tell, and it's not that I don't want to tell the tragic parts, because honestly, you need both to keep people engaged. It can't just be this like beautiful, very surfacey, like, look how beautiful the world is. That's not at all what I'm saying. It's like, the best stories have complexity, and they talk about the challenges, but also talk about, the hope, and like all of it. It needs to be in the story.
Tell us about this wonderful story. I'm conscious of your time, so we're wrapping up soon. But tell me about this wonderful story. Well, wonderful in a kind of ambivalent sense. The story of the northern white rhinos, and it's sad in its essence, but it's extremely hopeful and positive in its progress. One hopes. Now, this is on off the back of recent documentary that features you and some other incredible scientists and um, Kenyans who are doing such fantastic work and have done for many years with these wonderful creatures. Can you give us a bit of, I mean, I'm not sure how much you can talk about it, but obviously the documentary's out there, so I encourage everyone to go and watch that. It's extremely moving, extremely well told by yourself and the producers and everyone that's in it. Fascinating. Didn't quite realize we were at such a dire state, but can you tell us a little bit more about that story in itself, but also what's been happening since you guys shot that, and if there's any updates that we can be privy to?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think the beautiful part of this story is actually the collaboration between so many different incredibly committed human beings, from Zachariah and all of the keepers. I mean, all of them are amazing, and the rangers and the people on the front lines with the animals day in and day out, to, the veterinarians in Kenya Wildlife Service. Like, there's just, and it's like this international collaboration from biorescue, like, just a lot of people, and I feel like, to me, that piece of the story isn't always told, and it's such an important piece, is, like, that is half the battle, is, like, bringing a diverse group of people into one space together for this greater mission than themselves. And by the way, these people, like, are paying for their flights every time to get to Kenya. Like, there's so much commitment, um, and and you know, they, in the darkest hour, like, there were, first 8 northern white rhinos left known to be alive on the planet in 2009, and they moved 4 of them to Kenya in the hopes that they could breed and possibly save the species. Tragically, it never happened. The 2 females were not able to hold a viable pregnancy, and then the 2 males died. And then I had been keeping in touch, was there, and then in the darkest hour, when you feel like there is no hope, that this, I mean, really, they are magnificent creatures, and I literally fell in love with them, being so close to them, and realized, like, their sentience, realized how important they are to our whole ecosystem, and so it was down to 2 females, and then, Biorescue, who had been working with them very closely for a while, really during the pandemic, right before the pandemic started, going and collecting, the immature eggs of the last females, and now it's just 1 female, Fatu, that they collect the eggs, then they have to fly them to, Italy, where Aventia Labs, like, take the frozen sperm, make these embryos. Anyway, long story short, they've, like, created these embryos, and then the final step, has been, how do you create a viable pregnancy in a surrogate from a closely related species? And, um, and they did. They actually created, they made a they the film shows all of this, but basically, they were able to take a southern white rhino embryo. They wanted to do a test before they used those precious northern white rhino embryos in a surrogate, and they did. They had a viable 70-day-old fetus, and then climate change came and brought these, like, unimaginable rains to Kenya, and it unearthed this bacteria that lives in the soil for centuries, and the rains were so, just so, uh, strong and violent, and it unearthed this bacteria, Clostridius, and instantly killed the surrogate and her fetus and this bull that was being used. And then they, quickly, we were all so shocked and didn't even understand what happened. And then the test came back, and they vaccinated. Everybody always asks, like, "What about the other rhinos?" Well, they were able to vaccinate the rhinos against this bacteria, And now the next phase is like actually implanting northern white rhino embryos into surrogates. And that is happening. And I think people need to watch the film. And I can't share much more other than to say that I believe that we will see northern white rhinos roaming the plains of Africa again. And, the key though to remember is like, let's not wait for science to save us. Like, is it possible? Yes, probably. Yes, it is. But do we want to wait for the end of, the last moments to be saving species? And I think like the best part about this work is that they can actually be working on other rhino species, other species that are, on the edge of extinction, not down to 2 females, but other species. So there's a lot of lessons here. It's been this like truly like heartbreaking story of ups and downs where you're just, emotionally it's exhausting. I mean, I don't know how to explain to people, but it's not like all hopeful at all. And it's heartbreaking, but I also, at the end of the day, look at all the people I admire in the world and all the advocates and people who have created great change. And I realize we may never be alive to see the impacts of our work, but that's not what drives us. Like, we're in the middle of the story right now when it comes to this planet and everything we're doing to it. And the story's not written. Like, we all get to decide what we all do with our lives. And I would just say that all of us have a role to play, whether it is the storytellers or the scientists or just being a good human and thinking about our consumption and how to be a better human on this planet, and that we're in this beautiful web together. And then, there's this, I love this author, Richard Powers, and really talks about this. He's like, "Your suffering is my suffering." I'm like, "Absolutely. That's right. Your joy is my joy." And kind of really getting into that in a heartfelt way, you start to feel it and understand. Um, and then your work becomes something o outside of yourself in a way. And yeah, I does
What are
that
you thinking about? And yeah, it does. And last question for you. But what are you thinking about? I realize we've had this conversation and we haven't really talked about photography much. But what are you thinking about as a photographer? Right in when you go to Kenya for these trips, do you go with a pre-planned kind of, "Oh, I want to get these shots and I want to try and tell this specific element of the story," or are you just rolling with it in a kind of really journalistic way and seeing what you can capture at the time? What's your process like in these types of trips?
Great question. A little of both. And also, I should say I'm a filmmaker, and a lot of the footage in the last Rhinos was mine.
Was it? Oh, okay, wonderful.
So I was doing a lot, and I'm always doing a lot. Like, you're in front of the camera, you're behind the camera, you're writing, you're making films, you're making pictures. And do I plan? Absolutely. I do a lot of planning, but I also leave enough space for, you know, the things I didn't imagine, leave space for whatever happens in front of me to just simply document. I never like try to, um, you know, push and create like those scenes unless like I'm doing an interview, but I guess I really am a documentarian and I'm just trying to tell story and thinking of all the ways to tell it creatively and all the tools we have. Like, we have so many tools these days. So there's just a lot of gear you're thinking about, from audio to multiple cameras to, is this going to be a stills moment or is this going to be a video moment? And so it's just like a lot of preparation and gear and just tech that goes behind a lot of it. So with those stories, there's a lot that I'm juggling in my brain and trying to make sure. capturing important moments. Sometimes I can't even be in those spaces, so I have remote cameras there. Um, so yeah, there's just like lots of that. And then, on other stories, I like to be able to just be totally free and be more creative and like feel the moments and just, listen a little bit more. And that's also a beautiful space to be in. And to be honest, I'm really kind of craving that. I'm really ready to wrap up some of these like, decades old stories I've been working on and be like, my work is done.
Yeah, just give birth already. Come on.
It's like, I want to start something that is just, going to challenge my brain in different ways.
So what does success mean to you in that respect then? Because you talked about the fetus that was born, which was your incredible photo of that fetus in two palms of the hands that made the Nat Geo front cover, and many photographers in that genre would feel that when I get a photograph from the front cover of Nat Geo, I've done it, right? So what is that? I know that's not really any kind of definition of success, but what does it mean to you now in terms of like a successful project, or success as a kind of a generic term?
Well, I always feel slightly embarrassed because there is so much emphasis on us as the storytellers. And to me, it's like, oh my goodness, the all the people that actually deserve the recognition couldn't even they weren't even named in the film, and that broke my heart, to be honest, because there's so many people that deserve to be a part and named and recognized, and at the same time, I'm so grateful to National Geographic for believing in this story and putting their time and energy and resources and the whole team. I mean, that was a multiple people that came over and were documenting that and really a part of it. So that was amazing because you know why is like I genuinely can say like my goal is to shine a light and like help the people that need the support. Frankly, getting more financial support for the science, for the conservation. We need and I believe, I also have seen how the storytelling can do that, just some of I've experienced this where like, an image I've taken has been able to actually I can go and advocate it and it raises millions of dollars for the organizations whose stories I'm telling. So that is what I believe is drives me and makes me happy to see that happen. And it doesn't always happen, but when it does, you're like, that's amazing. And there's power in that. But I think, um, what does success mean to me? Honestly, I really want to fade away a little bit now and um, do things to support other people. There's millions of stories that need to be told. And how can I, open those doors for others now? How can I, I've had that privilege of entering some of these spaces. And now I feel like my role is to like keep that door open. Come on in because we need to nurture and support so many people who never had access to spaces. So I think about that a lot and and then also just like really doing some deep soul searching myself right now. Like, what is it that I, how I want to be spending my very limited time on this planet? And, really that's what I'm thinking about right now.
Well, Amy, I wish you the best of luck with all of your future endeavors. That you continue to be such a huge inspiration for literally millions of people. So, if we had more people like you on this planet, we probably wouldn't be in some of the despairing situations that we are. So, thank you so much for the incredible work and inspiration you do provide so many people, including myself. And I'm extremely grateful that you can spend time with me and with other people, spreading such good messages and inspiring so many people. So, hope we can meet one day. And I wish you the best of luck with Vital Impacts. What a wonderful organization. We didn't even really talk about that much, but I would encourage people to go and apply for the recent grant. Remind me of the deadline so that we can.
September 15th.
September 15th. So we get this out before then. And if people are watching, listening to this, then get onto that application process. I know I will. So, Amy, without further ado, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I just want to throw it back to you. Like, thank you for taking the time and really, you know, giving space to so many other people. I really appreciate your work, and it's a real privilege to be here. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.